everyone, and welcome to Tier 3 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. As we dive into Tier 3, it is a little bit longer than the other two tiers. As you can see in the picture, or if you've looked at the iceberg, the tiers get longer and longer as we go down, so this video might be a little bit longer than the other two. I hope that's okay. I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today, and let's get into it. The Lane Bryant shooting is a suspected robbery gone wrong, happening on February 2nd, 2008 at a Lane Bryant clothing store in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois called Tinley Park. The shooting killed 5 people and injured 1 other. The shooter took 4 customers, a part-time employee, and the store manager to the back of the store and shot them. Now, if you're doing the math, that's 6 people. The part-time employee lived, but was seriously injured. Police found the victims after they received a 911 call that morning. The gunman was described as a black man with thick, cornrowed hair and a receding hairline. As this is still unsolved, no one is sure the motive, which is why the leading theory is that this is a robbery gone wrong. However, I couldn't find anything on if money was or was not taken. After the police released a sketch of the suspect on February 11th, they got over 24 leads in the first 24 hours. Lane Bryant actually did the right thing as a company, in my opinion, in the aftermath as well. They offered a $50,000 reward for any information leading to the gunman's arrest. They also established the Lane Bryant Tinley Park Memorial Fund in honor of the 5 victims and offered to pay for all the victims' funerals. I've never heard of Lane Bryant before, but they seem like a good company. It wasn't their fault that these 5 women died, but they did in their store, and the store did everything they could to help out those families. The Burger Chef murders took place at a Burger Chef restaurant in Speedway, Indiana on November 17, 1978. I've also never heard of Burger Chef. A lot of this seems like East Coast things, and I live in Utah. I've never been further east than Denver as of right now, as of time of recording. I've never been further east than Denver, so I've never heard of a lot of these places. Between 11 p.m., which is when the restaurant closed, and midnight on November 17, 1978, 4 employees of the local Burger Chef disappeared. A fellow employee who came by around midnight to say hi noticed that the restaurant was empty. The safe was open, and the back door was cracked open. I know what you're thinking. Why would this employee just show up to say hi? That's kind of suspicious. And if you've never worked a fast food or like a food job, I totally get that you wouldn't understand. But we had employees showing up on their days off after close just to hang around while we closed. So it was pretty normal, at least when I worked in a food job. When police arrived, they found a roll of tape next to the open safe and were told that about $581 was missing. Police initially didn't take it that serious, as the theft was a small amount and there was no clear sign of a struggle, so the initial thought was that the cash was taken by the employees to go partying. When the employees weren't seen after the next day, concern about them began to grow. It became clear that they were in fact not out partying, but had likely been abducted. Real pain struck the town that following Sunday when some hikers found the bodies of all 4 employees over 20 miles away. 2 of the employees had been shot, 1 had been stabbed, and the 4th had been beaten and choked to death on his own blood. The leading theory is that the 4 were kidnapped during a botched robbery, possibly after one of the victims recognized one of the perpetrators. One of the employees that was there that night was actually not scheduled to be there, instead covering for someone else. It's possible that this employee was the one that recognized the suspects, since they wouldn't have planned on him being there. An eyewitness saw 2 suspicious men in a car outside of the restaurant just before closing. Both men were white and in their 30s, one had a beard and the other was clean shaven with light colored hair. Investigators actually believe that they have identified the perpetrators, however, without any physical evidence, they haven't been able to prosecute those who are still alive. Do you want to hear a real conspiracy? Roughly 50% of all my viewers are not subscribed. That's 50% of people, that's half of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button today. On April 17th, 2013, an explosion occurred at the West Fertilizer Company's storage and distribution facility in the city of West in Texas. This explosion happened while firefighters were already responding to a fire at the facility. 15 people were killed, more than 160 were injured, and more than 150 buildings were damaged or destroyed. In 2016, 3 years later, the ATF stated that the fire had been deliberately set. However, that finding has been disputed. At the time of the incident, OSHA, which is the Regulatory Committee for Employee Safety, hadn't inspected the facility since 1985, which if you do the math there is 28 years. As I used to say at a previous job that will remain unnamed, if OSHA isn't here, it's OSHA approved. There isn't a ton of info on this one other than the cause of the fire remains unknown, and legal and forensic experts criticize the ATF investigation, saying that it was set on purpose. They disagree. No one was ever arrested and no suspects were ever named. The Atlanta murders of 1979 to 1981 were a series of murders committed in Atlanta, Georgia, between the years of 1979 and 1981. Over the 2-year period, at least 28 people were killed, including teenagers, children, and adults. Over 100 agents were working on the investigation. The city imposed curfews, and parents removed their children from schools and didn't allow them to play outside. As the media coverage of the killings intensified, the FBI predicted that the killer would dump their next victim into a body of water to conceal any evidence. Police then staked out nearly a dozen bridges and other bodies of water. One night during a stakeout, an officer heard a splash beneath the bridge, and another officer saw a white 1970 Chevrolet station wagon turn around and drive back across the bridge. The driver? Wayne Williams, a self-purported music promoter and freelance photographer. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, the Netflix series Mindhunter had a series of episodes about this case, so if you've seen Mindhunter, this is why it sounds familiar. While Wayne was arrested and convicted for the murder of 2 people, he professes his innocence to the others and just swears on his life that he's innocent. The police just kind of attributed a lot of the murders to Williams despite no evidence, and the rest of the cases remain essentially unsolved. In the mid-1980s, 3 women disappeared around Claremont, New Hampshire. In 1985 and 1986, the skeletal remains of 2 of the women were recovered within 1,000 feet of each other in a wooded area. The condition of the remains made the cause of death difficult to determine, but there were some factors that pointed to multiple stab wounds. The remains of the 3rd missing woman were found, with evidence again pointing to multiple stab wounds. At this point, investigators started looking at prior homicides in the area and found a couple previous cases of stabbings that reinforced the presence of a serial killer. At the peak of the investigation and after several additional homicides, investigators noticed similar habits, often used dump sites, and specific wound patterns linking many of the murders. There were a couple of suspects and a list of possible other victims, but no one was ever arrested and the list of victims has never been confirmed. The Cleveland torso murderer was a serial killer who was active in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. The victims were dismembered and their remains were disposed of in a neighborhood called Kingsbury Run. Most victims came from the east side of Kingsbury Run, called the Hobo Jungle, known for its bars, gambling dens, brothels, and homeless population. The official number of victims is 12, however, recent research shows that there could be as many as 20. The victims of the murderer were usually drifters whose identities were never determined, but there were some exceptions. Many were people called working poor who had nowhere else to live but in Depression-era shanty towns. The killer always beheaded and often dismembered the victims. In most cases, the cause of death was the decapitation or dismemberment, so they were not dead when the killer was doing their work. At one point, the killer taunted law enforcement by placing the remains of 2 victims in full view of City Hall. The killer would also send the head of law enforcement taunting postcards. The Long Island serial killer is a serial killer who is believed to have murdered between 10 and 18 people over the period of 26 years. Most of the known victims were sex workers who advertised on Craigslist. The victims' remains were found over a period of months between 2010 and 2011 after a police search of the area along the Ocean Parkway near the remote beach towns of Gilgo and Oak Beach in Long Island, New York. The search was started after sex worker Shanann Gilbert had disappeared in the area after a 911 call saying, quote, "They are trying to kill me." She also mentioned that she had just fled from a client's home. Her body was found later into the investigation in December 2011, almost a year after she disappeared. Police claimed she accidentally drowned, while an independent autopsy determined possible strangulation. As you can see here, all the bodies found between 2010 and 2011 were found in this very small 2-mile stretch of land, leading to the possibility and likeliness that they were all killed by the same person or group of people. There is currently a $25,000 reward leading to the capture of the killer or killers, so if you know anything, let me know so I can get that reward. There's not a lot of information on this one, but there is an interesting story, so hopefully you still enjoy this entry. The Frankfurt Slasher is a killer who operated in and around the neighborhood of Frankfurt in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1985 to 1990. 9 people were killed in total, and police believe the killer was Mr. Leonard Christopher. After a woman by the name of Carol Dowd disappeared, an employee at a local fish market, Leonard Christopher, became a suspect. Police went after Leonard despite the fact that he didn't match the witness's description of Mrs. Dowd being seen with a middle-aged white man before her death. There was also no evidence to link him to any of the other 8 murders, and there was only circumstantial evidence linking him to Dowd's murder in the first place. Despite all of that, he was tried and convicted on 1 count of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He has since passed due to cancer, but maintained his innocence the whole time. It is also worth noting that the 9th victim was stabbed to death in the same way as the other women, while Leonard was being held without bail on his murder charge. However, detectives said that this couldn't have been the same person because Leonard was in jail, so this must have been a copycat murder. The Highway of Tears is a 450-mile corridor of Highway 16 between the cities of Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, Canada. This location is where many crimes happen, either missing or murdered people, mostly Indigenous women, beginning in 1970. 80+ people have gone missing or have been killed along the stretch of highway. It isn't just one person committing these crimes, but it is interesting that many women, specifically Indigenous women, have been targeted along the stretch of road. Possible explanations is that this is a relatively poor area that has some issues, including drug abuse, domestic violence, disruption of the family unit, and low car ownership due to poverty. With the low car ownership due to poverty, hitchhiking is very common along the stretch of highway and often the only way for many to travel far distances for whatever reason. The area is also largely isolated and remote, with soft soil in many areas and carnivorous animals that can carry away human remains. Out of the 80+ victims, 38 have been solved or at least have some sort of update, while everyone else still remains unsolved and unknown. The Texas Killing Fields is a 25-acre patch of land in League City, Texas, about 26 miles southeast of Houston. Since the early 1970s, dozens of bodies of murder victims have been found in this area. The bodies were mostly that of girls or young women. While a lot of remains have been found here, many young girls have disappeared from the area who remain missing. It's believed that many of the murders are the work of multiple serial killers. Most of the victims were aged between 12 and 25 years old. Despite efforts of the local police and the assistance of the FBI, very few of these murders have ever been solved, and those who have been solved were predicated on confessions given by prisoners or confessions given under duress from the police. Remember everyone, always get a lawyer and never ever take a polygraph. There's actually a movie based on this area with the director of the movie calling it the perfect spot to commit and hide a murder. On November 18, 1987, police showed up to the home of Keith Darden, who lived in Illinois in the United States, after he had failed to show up to work that day. There, they found the bodies of his wife and son, both brutally beaten. Elaine Darden, who had been pregnant with the couple's daughter, had been beaten so badly that she'd gone into labor, and then the killer or killers also beat the newborn to death. The killings had apparently taken place the day before. Investigators at first believed that Keith was the prime suspect, which I would as well. The next day, however, his body was found in a nearby field. Keith had been shot and his genitals had been mutilated. His car was parked near the police station in Benton. Forensic examination showed that he had been killed within an hour of his family. Residents of the area were already fearful after more than 10 murders had taken place locally in the preceding 2 years, and this did nothing to calm their nerves. Rumors held that the killings were the work of Satanists, but police soon ruled that out as well as other motives, mostly from illicit behavior such as drug dealing, marital infidelity, or gambling. With that said, the crime scene also rules out robbery or forcible sexual assault, and in the absence of any clear cause or leads, this crime remains unsolved. That is tier 3. I did cut out 2 entries, the assassination of 2 presidents, because it was just the start of a civil war, so it seemed pretty obvious in my mind that it was just their opposition who shot the plane down. I also didn't include the Ghouta chemical attack, because this was just done by Bashar al-Assad in Syria, so we know who did it. Bashar al-Assad's an evil dude. Syria is a bad place right now. Do not go there. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below if you did. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. Remember to hit that like button, remember to hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.